Hello and happy Friday. For our reading for this morning, I am actually going to read two of the lectionary passages for today. I chose to read both these because I think that read together they have some really interesting similarities and differences that are worth considering side by side. And I hope that as you listen, you too pick out some of the contrasts and similarities that stand out to you. The first reading comes from 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 13 through 17. Accept the authority of every human institution for the sake of Christ, whether it be the ruler as the supreme authority or the governors who are sent by the ruler to punish wrongdoers and to commend those who are good citizens. For it is the will of God that by doing right you may silence those who are foolish in their ignorance. Live as free women and men. Don't use your freedom to cloak evil, but to serve God. Respect all people. Love the family of believers. Stand in awe before God. Honor the ruler. Our second reading comes from Exodus chapter 3, verses 16 through 22, and chapter 4, verses 18 through 20. Now go, gather the elders of the Israelites and tell them, I am, the God of your ancestors, appeared to me, the God of Sarah and Abraham, the God of Rebekah and Isaac, the God of Leah and Rachel and Jacob, and said, I have heard you and I have seen the way you are being treated in Egypt. I tell you now, I will lead you out of your oppression in Egypt into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, to a land flowing with milk and honey. They will hear your message, and together with the elders of Israel you will go to the rulers of Egypt and say, Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, met with us. Permit us, therefore, to make a 3-day journey into the desert to offer sacrifice to Yahweh. However, I know that the ruler of Egypt will not allow you to go except by the force of a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders I am going to work there. After that, the Pharaoh will set you free. And I will make the Egyptians look with favor on you, so that when you leave you will not go empty-handed. Each of the women will borrow objects of silver and gold from their neighbors and any people renting from them. They will borrow clothes from them as well, which you will put on your daughters and sons. In this way you will plunder Egypt. Then Moses returned, this is now jumping ahead to the next chapter. Then Moses returned to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said, Give me permission to return to my own people in Egypt. I need to know if they are still alive. Jethro said, Go in peace. While he was in Midian, Yahweh said to Moses, Go back to Egypt. All those who wanted to kill you are dead. So Moses put Zipporah and their 2 children on donkeys and set off for Egypt, and carried God's staff in his hand. In the first reading, I struggled with the very first line. Accept the authority of every human institution for the sake of Christ. Well, I have to say, there's a lot about human institutions that I find in direct opposition to the ministry of Christ. This pandemic, I think, has made it abundantly clear just how limited and broken many of our human institutions are. I'm not saying that we don't have good leadership in the midst of all of this, because we have, and I'm very grateful for our public leaders who have worked for the health of our communities. But our societal systems have not been created to care for every person within our borders. They just haven't. There are so many people falling through the cracks. There are so many people we are failing. I see it every day when I read the news, when I read about how the coronavirus is disproportionately impacting communities of color, or when I see job postings asking people to put themselves at risk of this virus for a salary that wouldn't even cover the average cost of housing each month. This is not a system I imagine Christ would be in favor of. So let's turn instead to the second verse. And here we see a story from the side of the oppressed, as God comes to their aid. God, knowing that the Egyptians would not allow the Israelites to leave, stands up on their behalf and promises to strike the Egyptians with wonders until the Egyptian authorities allow them to leave. This passage isn't specific as to what those wonders will be, aside from the casual plundering, but if you're familiar with the story of Moses, you know that the 10 plagues that come in future chapters aren't exactly fun. Now here's where I cringe a bit, because a vengeful, retaliating God is an element of the Bible that I don't feel comfortable with. But perhaps there is something to be learned from it regardless. In this verse, we see God in direct opposition to authority because of its use of oppression and injustice. We are told over and over again throughout the Bible that our God is a God of the oppressed. Jesus serves as the proof of that. Jesus served on the behalf of misfits, the outcasts, the sinners, and those on the margins. He came filled with a holy anger, with the purpose of flipping human institutions on their heads to show the world a new definition of love and justice. So while I may be uncomfortable with the imagery of God sending plagues that cause suffering to communities, the story does serve as a reminder that we belong to a God who fights on the behalf of justice and liberation, and not on the behalf of the privileged and of power. So I'm not going to lie to you, I still don't entirely know what to make of the first passage from 1 Peter. All I can really do is read the passage through the lens of the God that I know. And the God I know is a God of liberation, justice, and love. So if we are to look at the structures to which our society currently are built upon, I do not see liberation, justice, and love. In fact, I feel myself filled with that same holy anger Jesus possessed. If we are to support institutions only for the sake of Christ, then I see a disconnect between what we have and what we could have. So when it comes to accepting the authority of the human institutions, I choose to be critical, to continually ask myself whether the institutions in which we participate are built for the care of all creation or for just a few, to continually question whether they are built for the sake of power or for equity and for the respect of all people. In doing so, I hope that we will be able to work towards the society which Christ envisioned for us. Amen.